Hey, we
Hey!
freaking did it! Jeez, Louise, could Instagram make it any harder to do this?
Mark, call me back if you need anything.
All right, thanks, sister. Hey, sister, how are you?
I'm all right. This has been, yeah, learning for me as well.
You look so nice. I love your earrings.
Thank you. And I've had to put a plant light up, so it looks like I have, sun.
It's beautiful. It's a nice tint for you.
Thank you.
Hey, pal. So I'm joining you on your Instagram live instead of you joining me. um, Perry, let me just give people, I just want to say that Perry and I met at Standing Rock in 2018 when the state was trying to take away or disenfranchise Native American voters in North Dakota. And we got together and we basically busted out what became Stand and Vote. Mm-hmm. And we got the Native people of many different tribes. We went all over North Dakota to tell them what they needed. There was a lot of disinformation out there, right? Yeah. And what did we do? I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, we did the thing. I honestly feel like if we had just more weeks and months to do what we did with voter education and organizing and getting out to vote and getting folks motivated to not only know their rights but to turn each other out, like they knew it was an election to fight for. We got people to vote and we broke records. There was counties and districts that ran out of ballots, so we are holding people accountable.
And what else happened? What happened to the dude who came up with this draconian law to suppress Native voters?
We voted him out, and Ruth.
That's
Buffalo
right.
got
That's
elected.
What happens when you F with us. Don't F with us.
Ruth Buffalo did the work, and she got elected and got the guy out. So it was amazing.
That's right. And we had record-breaking turnout in a lot of places, right?
Yeah, we did.
And we had people from all over the place come and join us. We did a concert with Billy.
We did 2 concerts. One with your friends, but Billy. Oh my gosh, having him come up to Turtle Mountains. Do you remember the joke he played on the football team? So we were all in the room, and the football team had. This was the first time that Turtle Mountain had a high school football team go to state. So this was a huge moment.
It was huge, yeah.
And Billy had them all come into his locker room, and he was like, I'm so glad, I'm so proud of you all for getting to state. And then he goes, Miley, come out here. And everybody went to the bathrooms that were in his dressing room. And he's like, just kidding, she's not here, but I am.
That's amazing. Billy Ray Cyrus was with us.
Billy Ray.
Billy Ray. It was amazing. I'm going to tell people a little bit about you, Prairie, because a lot of people know, I know, and some don't. And I want them to know what great work you do. Prairie Rose Seminole is Arikara. She's Northern Cheyenne and is the program manager for Advanced Native Political Leadership. She's involved with the organization's leadership and core work to develop strategy, coordinate national efforts, develop partnerships, and build curriculum to train candidates and leaders to run for elected office. Yeah. Very good. Seminole Prairie Rose resides in and has been involved in North Dakota state and national politics for over 20 years and has served in appointed public office. Prairie Rose found her passion organizing early. Thank God, because I know what a great organizer you are. With nearly 20 years of organizing, leadership development, I hope I'm not embarrassing you, dedicated to building inclusive movement, shifting the balance of power to create real positive change for Indigenous people and communities. Thank you, Prairie. Prairie Rose has led campaigns to elect candidates and organized and trained on issues from healthcare system reform, racial and environmental justice, gender justice, and marriage equality. She previously served as director of the North Dakota Native Vote coordinating statewide initiatives. In 2018, Prairie Rose partnered with Western Native Voice, North Dakota Native Vote to join efforts to inform, engage, and equip Native voters in North Dakota after the Supreme Court decision to uphold North Dakota voter ID requirements. You've been working your butt off, sister, for a long time on these issues.
Yeah, and I'm all about building power and getting the voices that need to be heard out there. And I feel like you just giving this platform and this space to change the system. We have to change the system.
And when you say change the system, what do you want to see the system change into that it isn't right now?
Well, I'm a believer in, if you want to, change a system of white supremacy, you got to get all the white supremacists out of the system, right? And
Yeah.
I want to see a system that values me and my voice as a Native American woman, where I don't have to tell my nephews that they're going to be targeted because of the color of their skin, right? And that there isn't a system that benefits one demographic over the other because of the color of their skin. I still live in a region where there's a lot of anti-Indianness, and others can relate because of anti-Blackness that's out there, and
That's
the
right.
barriers in place that are keeping us down. They don't want us to be involved. We're power. When we're collective and acting as a movement, we're absolute power.
And you're not asking for anything more than equality. You're not asking for special treatment. You just want to be treated like everybody else.
Right. And our sovereignty as tribes, we were here before there was a government called the United States. And what does that mean for us and our autonomy to our land and to our people? I mean, we're still fighting for that autonomy and that recognition for sovereignty. And there's a lot of voices out there. And I work with not only Advance, but Indigenous Environmental Network. And we're out there fighting every day so that Indigenous sovereignty is upheld. But you also understand that there's no climate justice without understanding Indigenous sovereignty. There's no housing for all without understanding Indigenous sovereignty, right? Like, this is basic civics education. We want everybody to know. And it isn't about treating one person better than others. It's about that equity and that treatment of balance. We need balance in our life.
That's right. Now, for people who don't know, let's talk about what sovereignty is. What that means. What is Native sovereignty?
Well, if you're in the Constitution, sovereignty still treats us as second-class citizens. I mean, we're the merciless Indian savages, right? But sovereignty is this unique political class of people within the United States that has formed treaties with the United States government, and they recognize us as American Indians or Alaska Natives, right? Alaska became a state in the 1950s. And so they have different relationship with the federal government, but we have a unique trust relationship with the federal government, and therefore are allowed to practice our own governance structures, which unfortunately were a model that may or may not have benefited with our own people, but we're moving forward. So it's this inherent right to who we are in exchange for land that you live on, right? So it's a trust relationship with the federal government. You are the mortgage to the Indigenous people in this country, and the federal government hasn't been paying it.
So let's just talk about treaty, because treaty rights and honoring the treaty are huge issues. And anyone who's done any work with Native people know that these treaties have not been honored. They don't really understand that a treaty was an agreement made between the United States and the Native people, with the United States needing these treaties in order to flourish, to do what United States wanted to do. So they needed the Native people to make these treaties. It wasn't like they were giving Native people a break or a pass or anything like that. It was what the United States needed from the Native people of the land,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. And if you look at the original treaties, there's larger land allotments than what we currently live on, right? And our treaties were recognized by not just sovereign nations as tribes and the United States government, and at that time, the early formation of the United States government, but sovereign nations like France and Great Britain and Spain and all of these other countries that are recognized as sovereign nations today. We are at the same level as those other countries.
But do you feel like you're treated that way by the United States government?
Oh gosh, no, never, never, right? They never honored those treaties. They still had policies of genocide and assimilation. And, they moved us from the dealing with the Indian population as indigenous population as a Department of War to the Department of Interior, right? And who else is in the Department of Interior? No one else is. It's
Nobody.
land, it's national parks, right? It's these resources, livestock, right? That were treated still as such.
I always think that we should make a Shoah type film about the Native American genocide experience, the Holocaust, and interview Native people about what happened to them and their families during that time. I mean, America, even though we'd made these treaties, did so many underhanded things and was literally trying to not only wipe the native people out, but also completely wipe out your culture. Mm-hmm. And so you have this enormous trauma that you guys are living with, and we live in a country that refuses to atone for that, to create some sort of peace and recognition and truth and reconciliation towards that. If we were to do truth and reconciliation, what would that look like? I mean, this is off to the side, but now we're totally.
Truth is absolutely needed. And I'm only one generation removed from the boarding school era. My dad was taken away. He spoke 5 languages when he was growing up, but that was beaten out of him, right?
Tell people about the boarding school era. What was that? What happened there?
That was a federal policy. That was legislation funding over 500 schools in the United States that were established either on or off reservations to assimilate our kids. And that was General Pratt, who said, kill the Indian, save the man, right? Like that was the mentality, like beat us out of our identity. And when you par that onto what was happening previously with genocide, right? They were killing our warriors, killing our elders, and removing our children, right? Putting them into locked up environments. And that went on for over 150 years.
Not unlike what we're seeing on the border today.
Mm-hmm. A lot like what we're seeing at the border today. And the legislation funded those boarding schools. And because the United States didn't have the capacity to train and be educators about, indigenous people, they contracted with faith denominations. So that's why you saw a huge increase in like the Catholic Church, the Methodists, the Episcopals, the Presbyterians and others who basically were part of this large land grab because of a federal contract that now employed their church to assimilate indigenous children, and indigenous children shipped to those schools. And parents, if you refuse to send your child, you could be beaten or killed or otherwise, right? Legally. And those denominations didn't have the most faithful of people educating our children, right? So who did they hire? They hired anybody. It was a job for a lot of people. And it imagine what it did to that child who was removed. Imagine what it did to that family who never saw their children again. And imagine what it did to whole communities who were devastated by the loss of their children, right? And then those children who come back in later years, if they survived boarding school, to come home to a community that they don't understand anymore, So we're still dealing with the ripple effects of that. And even in my own family, like my dad was never able to say I love you, he just didn't have it in him, but he showed us how he loved, right? I have a picture of my dad. If you look above,
I would love to see that.
Right up here.
Yeah.
He was in the.
Can you lift it a little bit more? Can you take us over there so we could really honor the guy?
Yeah. He was in a play called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
He was?
Yeah. He played.
I love that play.
He played the chief, if you can see it.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's your dad's name?
He passed. His name's Delbert Seminole, though.
All right, Delbert. Look at what your daughter's doing for you. Rest in peace, Delbert. You're here with us.
My dad.
By the way, let me do a quick land recognition. I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Lenape Munsee people, just to honor where I'm coming from.
I appreciate that. And I'm actually calling you from the occupied lands of my own people, the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara people. I'm calling from Garrison, North Dakota, which is a border town to the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. So
We were there, right?
you came through here.
Yeah, we did a stop, didn't we?
We did. We did actually. Yeah, you came to the Knife River Indian villages, and then we came around and came up this way and took the back roads all the way up to Newtown, North Dakota.
That's right. We saw Hidatsa village, right?
Yep, Mandan village. Yep.
Yes, and one of the remarkable things about that village was the women were the property owners.
Mm-hmm.
That was a matriarchal political society, wasn't it?
It was. Well, our government could have been matriarchal if you think of all the influence from the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy nations, and how this government in the United States was influenced by them, and even the suffragist movement was influenced by those matriarchal societies. And just if you can imagine, like, they intentionally built it for patriarchal authority, right? Like, they totally cut the women out, even though they were influenced by this amazing, incredible democracy of Indigenous people.
Yeah, I don't think people realize, folks, our American democracy was based on the Haudenosaunee, which is near where I'm at in New York State. It was a matriarchal system that put male leaders out front that were decided upon by the women, and they could be impeached by a council of women.
Can you imagine that?
Oh,
right
buddy,
now,
we'd be
we had
living
that
in
in
a very
place.
different place. And that was the one piece they didn't take and adopt to the United States.
Yep.
They left probably the most important piece of that balance out, which was to have a balance between the power of men and women in government.
Yep.
And so let's talk a little bit about the work you're doing. We're already into it, but and this particular moment, you know, I was on a call the other day that you were on, and we were talking about how important the Native vote is in this part of the United States, which has been held by Republicans for how many decades now?
Yeah. It feels like it's too long. It's almost my lifetime. So.
Yeah. And so, but we're talking about a shift that's happening, and we're talking about a whole new generation of voters. Now, your father's generation was clearly traumatized. And you and I got in a little bit about that earlier today. You want to talk about that trauma and how this next generation is free of that in a way, has been healed of that, and is ready to engage the world on their terms, but in a modern way?
Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna owe you a therapy bill or something. So you just gotta send good snacks. You know, my dad was part of the American Indian movement, and so his generation went through so much trauma. He was removed at 4 years old, right, into the boarding school situation, and there came a time when they were fed up. You know, they decided we're gonna fight, and that was the beginning of the American Indian movement. My dad wasn't like a big player like the Russell Means and Dennis Banks and Leonard Crow Dogs and many others who were part of that. But when you think of the American Indian movement, it had that balance too, as women running the show. I think of so many women that were part of that movement that weren't the ones standing on the front lines because the men had to fight, you know, the women ran everything else. But the trauma of the generations before me, and even within my own household, I think about the healing that I had to go through to continue my dad's fight. And in an arena where he would talk about distrusting the federal government, distrusting any authority, right? Not having any relationship with those systems. And my mom coming from this element of, no, we need to get involved. Like the hopeful reformer hat, you know, we need to get involved. If you're going to change the system, you got to get involved. So this intersection of like movement and front lines and like governments and being a part of that practice, right? Now here we are trying to reimagine our political culture and practices, but I'm only healed to do so much work. There's work that I know is coming that I know I can't carry it on. And so what gives me like the greatest hope is that these young people who are so like in a funny way, cynical towards the parties and the system, and they just want to burn it down, and they probably should, but they want to carry on that fight, and they want to change it. And I'm trying to create that space to get enough of them in there, this wedge of bring them all in. And the hard part about that, though, is these first candidates, the Ruth Buffaloes, the Deb Hollands, the Sharice Davids, and the many others, their job right now is like holding that front line so things don't get worse, right?
Yeah.
And so it isn't about the first woman from, it's about the third and the 10th and the 20th and that visibility, I remember, talking with my friend Peggy Flanagan, the Lieutenant Governor from Minnesota, and she said, it's so important for us to see ourselves right now. And in this moment, how are we seeing ourselves? If we're not in here fighting in the best way that we can, what are we doing? How is the system going to change if we're not in it?
I know, and I've heard a lot of young Native people say, "Well, this is just joining the colonial system that is created so much pain and trauma for our people." But then in the other sense, I see young Native people saying, "Listen, we have to engage this system in order to change it." That we all know when we saw at Standing Rock. When you stand against this system so blatantly, the system responds with militarism and violence, and so we have to ask ourselves, okay, that's a reality. That's a reality that you guys tackled with the Standing Rock movement. You met that you met that militarization and violence with peaceful civil disobedience and acts of civil disobedience, and the world saw that, and they fell in love with you. They saw your resistance and your strength, and they said, that's the way, those are the people I believe in. I don't believe in these jackbooted thugs that have bloodlust in their eyes for innocent, people protesting to keep their water clean. I think something shifted at that moment. Would you say that was true about how we're going to approach finding equity for Native people in this system that we're all in, that we're all fighting against in some way, and all working within?
I think you're right. I think a shift did happen because, later on, after that happened in 2016, across the board in 2017 in media, comedians were making jokes about, we're mad about a pipeline still, right? Like, people started paying attention to something that was never something that they personally felt connected to. And all of a sudden, we were visible. There's so much value in being seen and heard, and then being able to contribute to the conversation and move forward. The interesting thing about Standing Rock is when we had veterans get involved, all of a sudden these veterans were going to come and hold the lines down. And that actually forced the hand of local and even federal government agencies to like, oh, this is serious. Like, we need to make a decision about this. And you're right, they met us with force, but the people were peaceful. And think of the headlines at that time where we were treated as these, angry savages who were stealing cows and doing all these things. None of that happened, by the way. But we're also winning. We're winning in the courts. Like, that's where it matters right now, and a lot of people aren't paying attention to that.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You just had a major win, didn't you, in the federal government?
Yeah, the DAPL was found to be in violation of the environmental protection standards that they were supposed to be doing. And that's a huge win. But the other win that just happened too, because of the Supreme Court, was the McGirt case for Oklahoma, saying like basically most of Oklahoma was tribal, was Indian land. I don't think people pay attention to the courts enough and our judiciary. Of how valuable those positions are for the people. Like, we need to start paying attention to that a little bit more.
That's right. That was big news, though. That was big news. It basically gave almost 2/3 of Oklahoma to the Native people. And back to your sovereignty,
Yeah.
being able to deal with internal tribal issues within the tribe, not having state agents come within on the reservation and start pushing people around or asserting their power over the sovereignty of the Native people. Native people know what's best for them, and within their communities, if you allow them to do it, you get your boot off their neck. They have a way of figuring it out, right?
We still need balance with that, though. You know, the issue of our missing and murdered Indigenous people, though, right now, we could use the support of local law enforcement, right? We could use some collaboration and some understanding with local law enforcement to take that issue seriously. For example, 80% of the offenders in Indian country to our Native women and people are non-Native people, or they're not enrolled from that tribe, right? But it's a jurisdiction issue. Our tribal police officers, in most cases, are not able to hold or detain or intervene even sometimes with that type of violent situation. So if we don't have local law enforcement involved, nothing's going to happen. So when you're a victim and you have to wait for an officer or even wait to do like a rape kit, some women have to wait up to 2 or 3 days to even get access to a rape kit.
Come on.
Yeah, that's unacceptable, right? So if we had better partnership and relationships with local law enforcement and agencies, a lot of this can be remedied. And that goes back to our trust relationship with the federal government. I mean, the federal government can really make an Oliphant fix, which I'm not a lawyer, so don't ask me too many questions about that. But that really allows for these jurisdictional issues to be remedied across the Indian territories in Alaska.
So just to let people know, I mean, murdered and missing Indigenous women is such an enormous issue. I mean, is it 1 out of 2? What are the stats? I mean, it's shocking.
It's basically 3 out of 4 women experience violence in their lifetimes by a partner, and 80% of those are committed by non-Native partners. But it's the jurisdictional issues. But yeah, there's over 6,000 missing or Indigenous people across the country, and nobody's paying attention to that. Our men are being killed at a higher rate than any other demographic as well. My brother, you might have known this too, but was killed in custody of law enforcement here in Western North Dakota, and we couldn't seek any justice. We couldn't get any answers for over 2 weeks. And nobody will take the case, right? But I had so many families coming toward me saying, how they lost their own loved ones, and they just had no comfort in the justice system that they could follow. And so we just grieve, we just mourn, and we get up every day and try to, forget that this system is against us.
Okay, so now we're here talking about how to. So when we sent Sharice Davis, when we sent Deb Haaland, when we send Buffalo Rose to positions of power, to Congress and to state houses, what happens? What changes? How has having people like Deb and Sharice and Ruth Buffalo in office? This is historical. I was there. It was incredible. I went to Congress. I saw those women sworn in. It was historical. It was a beautiful celebration. It was kind of a powwow we had there. How tell people how this is important. Then we're going to segue into the voting work you're doing. Okay, I promise you.
Like I said, it absolutely matters when we've got elected leaders in every elected office. I want to see, the 500,000 elected offices in this country, in with positions held by women and Native women and Black women and brown women. Like, we just need more of us, because even just recently, the House passed Savannah's Act. The Senate passed Savannah's Act, right? Like, this is going to be addressing a lot of the issues we just talked about with missing and murdered Indigenous women. When Ruth Buffalo, in her first term as a legislator here in North Dakota, she introduced a bill similar to Savannah's Act for missing and murdered Indigenous people. But the interesting thing about what happened in North Dakota is that she opened this case for missing people, and let's put a registry together. there's no registry in North Dakota for missing people in general. So not only were we avoiding the issue that people are getting, murdered or missing in this state for Indigenous people, but we didn't have anything set up for anybody
to count them.
No accountability whatsoever.
There was no list to even count them, to even honor them being missing.
Nothing,
that's what you're telling me.
Yep. So because of her work, we now have something moving forward that is creating a database for missing and murdered people in the state of North Dakota.
I saw that. It was going to pass last year, and we had one Republican who was about to retire say no to the missing, murdered, and Indigenous women bill that would have started to make this a federal issue, right?
Yep. It was right before the elections in 2018 when that happened, because Senator Heitkamp was spearheading some of that at the federal level, and Alaska Senator Murkowski said that she would reintroduce it, and she did, but it just wouldn't move anywhere because Republicans were holding it up. And these are the things, like, we get partisan on it, but these are not partisan issues. These are personal. These are people's lives, right?
Tell me about it, man.
Like, it isn't partisan. This is personal. And we've got an administration and we've got a Congress, it seems, just trying to figure out how they can keep paying their friends, That's why we're not moving forward with...
Wait, is that what you think this is about? I wanted to ask you, why is it so hard to get movement on issues that make so much sense? I bet every person sitting out there listening to us is like, are you kidding me? There is no list for people that have gone, Indigenous women who've gone missing on any kind of state level. There's no movement on a federal level of investigating all of these murders and missing people. Why is it happening? How can this be happening in America?
We mess it up ourselves sometimes. When I think about, okay, I've aligned with this particular party, and I'm going to introduce legislation that moves us away from the non-renewable energy systems, right? Like, but then a week later is introduced a bill that is just business as usual, talking about uranium, talking about oil and coal.
So a lot of this is the extractive industries in North Dakota.
Right. And so it's at the federal level as well. You see this at the federal level, where if you're an elected leader for only 2 years, you're just being reelected is the focus. And how much work can you do unless you're there for a decade or two, right? Where senators have a different situation, both at the state and federal level, because they're in for longer terms. But even then, we have politicians who are making a career out of this. This shouldn't be a career. I shouldn't get rich being a politician. I mean, I shouldn't get rich at the expense of my own people, and that's what we're doing. We can be there and fighting for clean, renewable energy sources, moving in a just transition away from extractive industry, right? And providing clean jobs for labor and whoever, providing healthcare for everybody. Just imagine if we had sent masks to every household in the United States during this pandemic, right? Like, what a difference that would be. Accessible for free testing. I mean, myself, I've gotten tested 3 times and I had to drive an hour to get tested, So it's like, what kind of access are we providing for people as government agencies?
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about COVID, since you moved into that. Well, yeah, I mean, what's happening with COVID and what's happening with people voting and wanting to vote, and what's standing in the way of people getting to the polls, do you think? And what is the message we want to send them here while we're talking?
I think, COVID, I mean, the whole pandemic has really laid bare the chasm of disparity in this country, and things that we used to look at as charity, food pantries, public health, agencies that are kind of meeting people at the front lines, working with our houseless populations. We saw that if we stop this economy for like 1 month, that things were going to fall apart. So it was clearly a big picture that this capitalistic economy is not working for us. So we need alternatives. But in the meantime, how are we meeting the needs of the people? And when there was a meme out there that said, you know, I think it was Germany. Germany's giving their citizens, you know, $2,000 a month for the next 6 months, and in America you got $1,200 for the year. And then underneath it, it said, and you too for $6 a day can sponsor an American. And it just was like, it's crazy that we don't think of just taking care of our people. Like, how hard is that? We can fund wars across the world. We can hold occupied territories. Like, why is this country still holding on to territories? You know, we've got American Samoa and other Pacific Islands and Puerto Rico and Panama and Guam, or not Panama, Guam and others. But it's like, this pandemic has just completely opened all of this up to this reality that this government, this economy, this way of life is not sustainable. So how do we
killing us?
Killing us.
It's killing us. Hey, I just want to do a shout out to all the folks out there listening to me and Prairie Rose Seminole, who's coming to us from North Dakota, who's doing great work with voters, getting out the vote, registration, and census. So we love you guys, and thank you for joining us. And thanks for all the comments. We see them. I see you. I'm focused on my sister here, but know that I appreciate you being here. What's the political landscape and the pandemic and barriers in native country right now?
Oh, right. So
yeah,
you totally asked the question. I went on my soapbox and went somewhere else. But the pandemic has caused a lot of confusion because we want people to vote by mail. And that's a safe way to vote. If you can vote by mail, vote by mail. And there's complications in that. North Dakota has like a 2-envelope system. I think you posted something recently about Pennsylvania having a 2-envelope system where you have to know how to vote. Sorry, trucks are driving by. And, you know, this is rural North Dakota, so we've got our big loud trucks. So voter confusion is happening, and even our United States Postal Service is causing some of that confusion. And in states across the country, lawsuits are happening. I know Colorado Secretary of State is putting a lawsuit forward to the United States Postal Service for confusing its voters. And you know, other places in Alaska, for example, the lieutenant governor said you need a witness if you're going to vote by mail. For most people, that witness would have been their postmaster at their local post office, especially in rural Alaskan villages across the state. That's to keep people safe. That would have been the witness. But then the United States Postmaster General said that postmasters cannot serve as witnesses, right? So now we're putting people at risk because we need to have more people to serve as witnesses in places that are incredibly rural. So there's barriers across the country. And one other thing too is, like, I know we bring up the Navajo Nation a lot as an example, and their numbers are way down with COVID because they're practicing social distancing and wearing masks and making sure that people are doing things safely. But when you think of voting by mail, some on the Navajo reservation, the routes and the time it takes for their ballot to reach a place to be counted might take up to 9 days. You know, even the action of going to somewhere to drop their postal mail off. So Navajo Nation is about the size of West Virginia. West Virginia, and don't quote me on this, but has like over 700 places to drop their mail because they serve a largely white population. Yeah. Navajo Nation has under 30, more than 20, but under 30 places to drop their mail. And that to me is saying we're not in the culture of even making simple things like our right to the United States Postal Service as American citizens accessible to everyone across this country. And now we're putting that at risk as well. So the practice of voting by mail favors, you know, the white middle class. And those of us who live in communities where we have to travel to PO boxes or other places to get a witness to our voting, it's complicated. So we want people to, you know, vote safely and vote early, but they need to know the process. Okay, so let's make that clear. All right, let's you and me right now make it clear, like we did on Stand and Vote, what you need to do as a person, a Native person in North Dakota, to vote safely, to make sure you're doing what's right with your ballot, and to what do people need to know right now to make sure that their vote is counted? If you're going to vote early, contact the Secretary of State's office, and you can go online, nd.gov, Secretary of State, and file for an absentee ballot. And that'll come to you within a couple of days, and you send it right back. Just follow the directions on that. They're very simple. Drop it in the mail.
Now you said there was 2 envelopes. Do they need to know about that right now? Okay. So you get the big envelope with your ballot in it. Then you fill out your ballot. There's another little envelope in there. That ballot's got to be put into that envelope before you send it back. Okay.
Yes.
And do you have to sign that envelope in North Dakota and Pennsylvania? You have to sign it.
I believe you do not have to sign the envelope.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But you can also, voting early will start in a couple of counties in North Dakota. They'll be in the bigger cities like Fargo and Bismarck and Grand Forks and Minot will have voting early places. If you're going to go there, and this is true for election day, if you're going to vote in person anywhere, wear a mask, socially distance yourself from others, be respectful in that way, because the last time I was tested, there was actually somebody in there who said, I don't know why I need to be tested. The person who I was in contact with didn't have any symptoms. Our system is failing people for public health, folks.
We're getting misinformation.
A lot of misinformation. It's confusing. It really is.
But it's not that confusing that we can't do this,
Right.
Right? And
right.
and for younger people, it would be better for you to show up to vote early when the lines aren't long, and wear your masks. And if you're healthy, to get out there and vote as soon as you possibly can, because these people are working on trying to say they're winning this election the night of the election. And the more people we can have show up at the polls to counter that, and I'm not saying all the grandparents and people who have bad health should actually do the absentee ballots and mail-in voting. But if you can make it to a poll, it's better to do that. Would you say that's true?
I would. Especially, we're a demographic across the country that didn't get the right to vote until the 60s, right? So even my father's generation, like for most of his life, he never voted because he couldn't, right? So this practice in our communities is relatively new to vote in person. So now we're asking people who are just like getting involved in the whole culture of voting to change it up and vote by mail. So if you want to vote in person, I encourage you to vote in person. Just vote safely and wear a mask. I don't know if that's true across the country, but I know in some places you can do that. But I do encourage people to vote by mail where accessible and where possible. It's much safer than voting in person.
Native vote in North Dakota updates with recent formation of our caucuses.
Oh gosh, yes. That was huge. Well, we've talked quite a bit about this political system that doesn't work for us, right? So we have to do it ourselves. We're very used to voter engagement every election cycle, but when it comes to holding space for us and encouraging us to do other things than just vote, we needed that space. And especially in light of Ruth Buffalo's election here in North Dakota, and this might be true in other states as well, but we needed a space for our candidates to feel supported as well, because oftentimes the parties that serve our candidates don't know how to hold space for them. So if Ruth is getting harassed because of something that she brought forward as an Indigenous woman, we want her to feel support and say, keep your head up, or if you need a rapid response for something, how can we help you, right? Because some parties just don't have the capacity to do that. So we started this caucus, and it's the first of its kind. Not a big surprise, but the party either didn't have the capacity, they definitely had the interest, but just didn't have the capacity to really engage us beyond an election cycle. So for us, we decided to create this caucus for us by us. It has over 40 members in it right now from all the tribes in North Dakota. My focus is to really demystify the political landscape for our Native people. And what do I mean by that is what does a county commissioner do for tribal people? What does state legislator governor, tax commissioner, public service commissioner, what do those roles do in service to our tribal communities? We're not the only demographic dealing with a public health crisis like a pandemic. We have rural community issues as well in some of our communities. And our engagement with the party can only improve the quality of public policy moving forward, both at the state and the federal levels. So when we're engaged, everything gets better.
That's right. And so let's talk about one of the things you're working on that's so I think just really far-reaching into the future and laying down the groundwork for a more equitable United States for Native people and everybody else, really. Because when we give equity to any one group, we're building it within all of us. You're talking about training leadership, training the next group of politicians and leaders in native country. What are you doing? How are you doing that? And how are you bringing people up? And when are you going to run, babe?
That's a lot coming at me, Mark. I'm gonna start asking you questions. I've been a part of organizations. I was formerly a part of what used to be called Wellstone Actions with Peggy Flanagan, the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, and other organizations like Vote Run Lead and the White House Project. And now Advanced Native Political Leadership, which is the first national Native-led organization training candidates. And with those organizations already, we've trained over 32,000 people across the country. That's just with like one organization. There's probably tens and more thousands with the other collective organizations. But we want, like I said earlier, Deb, Ruth, Charisse, and others, they're holding the line. Hopefully things don't get worse because they're holding the line. Yeah. If we can get more of us in there, there's more capacity to make meaningful public policy that benefits everybody. Like I said, we're not the only one dealing with a public health crisis. So if we create something that serves our communities, it's going to serve everyone else as well. And I think about, my first run into politics, it was because I understood that if we're not there and people are making decisions about our lives, how good are those decisions going to be? When they don't know my lived experience.
I mean, who
right?
knows what Native people need more than you guys?
Exactly. And when you have a Native person run, our lived experience deepens the understanding to any public policy with whether it's health or education or other infrastructure needs, law enforcement. Like we already know what to be angry about. I think Americans know what to be angry about, right? Movement knows what to be angry about. Yes. Now we have to get into this mindset that if we're engaged and we actually are in office, we can change that situation, right? We have a missing and murdered Indigenous women's database in North Dakota because that mattered to our people, and somebody brought that forward. That wouldn't have happened otherwise, but it benefited every citizen of North Dakota. And at a national level too, it only betters every citizen. So how are we not making time for this? But I'm really excited to do this work across the country. I mean, even with Advance, moving candidates forward, our work goes beyond election day, right? This is a huge fight for us right now over the next 39 days, but we know that we need years-long strategy moving forward to get us out of the dynamics that we're in now.
I like to talk. There's a lot of young voters who aren't totally on board with the Biden Kamala, freight train. And I like to remind people that an election is just one step down a long road of building a better world for ourselves. And we have to ask ourselves, who is the better candidate for reaching that beloved society that we have our eyes on? And so do you want to say anything to the young voters? And then I want to get into who you think's exciting, that what candidates are out there that you guys are pushing, do you think are exciting right now? I know there's some natives running that I want to talk a little bit about, but what do you say to the young voter who is disaffected, who doesn't feel like this political system is looking out for them or has their needs and desires actually in place?
It's so hard because I get into that that culture of apathy as well. And the reality is, when you look at the history of this country, I mean, we were for over 100 years an illiberal democracy, you know, quasi-authoritarian white nationalist state, right? Where people were treated as subhuman, right? We just got this right. It's our right now to vote and to help change this system. And my friend, well, you know him too, Dallas Goldtooth from the Indigenous Environmental Network, said it best recently. He's like, we're not always going to pick our champion. We're sometimes picking the person we're not going to fight the most with, right? But and that's our right to vote. That's why we vote, is to move pieces forward. I mean, we're not going to get a table that where we show up and our rights are still in negotiation until we show up.
That's right.
Right? So to change this culture of apathy, I don't know. It's hard. You know, in my family, I grew up in a system where we all had chores.
Yeah.
And I didn't always like the chores, but we had to get them done. I don't think I can threaten non-voters and anybody else with the you know, the backhand that I would get if I didn't do my chores.
Yeah.
But there's things we got to participate in because our government is only as good as our citizenship. And if our citizenship isn't getting involved,
yeah,
how good is our government going to be?
That's right. We won't be represented.
So do it.
We won't be represented.
Let's
do it. Okay, two other things.
Stealing the next
who's hot? Who's exciting? What are the candidates you guys are fielding right now? Who are they? Where are they? What do you want us to know about them?
Oh gosh, Christina Haswood out in Kansas. You know, I think she's running unopposed right now, but she's amazing. If you haven't seen her TikTok, like, dude, go check out her TikTok. I have not seen a candidate move and explain things so succinctly as she does. Christine Haswood in Kansas. She'll be the third ever legislator in the state, native legislator in the state, when she's elected this November.
Amazing.
But she won her primary, which was huge because she ran with an opponent then, but now she's running unopposed in the state of Kansas. So I'm really excited about that. Support her, and Punkawee Victors also in Kansas. Those two women are just, they're fire. And Christina will also be, I think, the youngest legislator that they've ever had.
Great.
Gosh, you kind of
caught you.
I should have had my list ready, but in North Dakota, we've got 3 Native women candidates as well. We've got Tracy Wilkie, Lisa DeVille, and
that's right.
One other one whose name is totally escaping me. But yeah, we've got candidates. Heather Keeler in Minnesota State Legislature. There's a ton. There's more women running this year than there were in the 2018 elections.
That's
so we're
right.
Really excited about
and more
that.
Native women, right? More Native women.
Absolutely.
That's right. Okay, let's we're gonna wrap up. I want to ask you, what are your dreams like? What do you to end on a positive thing? What do you envision happening? I mean, what are we moving towards? What is the world that we want to create now?
Gosh, well, I think we can move into a world where Indigenous and Black lives matter, where our blood is no longer running in the streets together. I know you wanted to end on a positive note, but I know our young people with Indigenous and Black Brown communities are moving forward in a way that is changing the world as we know it. And so 20 years from now, when this young up and coming organizers that are in the fight right now will look back and say, we brought back our matriarchy, we brought back our kinship to the land and to the earth. We are feeding each other in our communities. We are using renewable energies and no longer dependent on extractive industry and labor. And we're no longer keeping children in cages at the border. You know, we are freely loving one another, because if we can hate without any feelings, we can love as well. And that's what I want to see the world in, is like we are taking care of each other again.
Oh, so let's end this the way I've been taught to end these kinds of important conversations, which is with the statement "Madakuye Oyase," which is we are all related.
Dakios, all related. I appreciate that, Mike. I appreciate you. Thank you for doing this.
You too, buddy. I love you. You're an inspiration to me. I'm so glad we got to do this, and I'm here to support you guys in any way possible. I believe in what you're doing. I believe in the spiritual practices of your people. I believe in your relationship to the world. I'm inspired by your willingness to move past these genocides, to forgive the people who have done them, to make the world good. I've been in the presence of a lot of traumatized Native people, and they're amidst that trauma, amidst that pain, they have been so generous to me as a white person. They have met me with open hearts and open minds and open arms. Even though I come from the world of the oppressor, we start every day brand new, and it is remarkable. It is a model for how we should move forward, and I rely on you and your wisdom and your spiritual practices to help America move forward in a good way. So thank you, sister.
Thank you, Mark. We need accomplices like you. We need better white folks, and thank you for sharing your spotlight with us. We really appreciate it.
We're here for you, man. We're here for you. There's so many of us, so let's do it.
Let's do it. Talk to you soon. Love you.
Have a good night, bud. Love you. Thank you. Thanks for having me on your Instagram Live.